Great. Alex, you ready for a great webinar today?
I'm excited, Kirk.
So let's see, we got, the great thing about a webinar is that everybody gets a front row seat. So let's take a look at people coming in. Hey, as you come in to help Alex and I out, since I know some of the people in the room, but not everybody, if you can put, in the chat box what city you're in, it'd be fantastic. And maybe if you want to say something for the group, what industry you're in, and let us know where you're at and what you're doing, kind of stuff. I know that we're gonna get started in just 2 minutes? 2 minutes after the hour. Alex, you know I'll launch.
Absolutely.
Yep. Got a nice crowd. Come on in, get settled. Lunchtime for some people on the East Coast. West Coast is just waking up.
Keith, thank you for starting us off, putting it in the chat. Who's going to follow up, Keith, and telling us where you're from?
Yeah, I know Keith increasingly well. He's Austin. We spoke yesterday, I think. The days are just blending together.
David,
great team down there.
For your humor.
I heard it. Canada is the news quite a bit now. All right, Utah. Yeah, fantastic. I'm from Houston, but my dad's from Utah, so it's been a lot of time going back and forth, mainly hiking. Fantastic. Yeah. So if you're just coming in, if you drop the city that you're in and your type of your industry, if you want people to kind of see what you do, that'd be fantastic. And the more we interact, as Alex and I go through stuff, share, jump in, ask questions, the more relevant this experience will be for everybody. So come on in. Alex, we're at 12:02. You ready to launch?
That's right. We're ready to go.
Let's go, right? So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kirk. I'm the CEO of Foresight CFO. In addition, I teach financial management at Georgetown University on the graduate level. So, people with experience, you really can do quite a bit with. And our topic today is your team avoiding accountability, right? Almost every CEO I talk to these days, there's something going on with the people problem. So if you think about it, to set the stage here, when we came into 2022, just a few months ago, it's almost a perfect storm, right? COVID cases are surging. There's an inconsistent approach across our country about how to respond to COVID and what the mandates are. And then coming out of last year, the Great Resignation, something like 24 million people resigned, right? Well, what's that? And then supply chains and inflation. We haven't seen inflation like this since the 1970s, the oil shocks. And there's angst among us CEOs about about the challenges moving forward. Even after 2 years of adapting, corporate leaders are still trying to figure things out. What should we go back to normal? Well, what's that, right? And this week alone, on multiple calls with CEOs, whiteboarding a way forward is coming up as the number one or number two obstacle in every instance. People problems. Even yesterday, I was on the phone with the CEO, and if she can't get at least 3 more people to build that capacity to do the work, at best, revenue will be flat this year over last year. So I'm delighted to have Alex, been a friend in the DC area for about 4 or 5 years now, in the CEO of People Stretch, to make us smarter about his approach to helping CEOs.
Yeah, so Alex Bartholomaus, CEO of People Stretch Solutions. So we focus helping companies grow through working on strategy, OKRs, but also on the leadership side and the sales effectiveness side. And so as Kirk and I were planning for this event, we started to kind of seeing a trend. And as we were talking to CEOs, they were having, as Kirk mentioned, this angst about people. So Kirk, if we can go to the next slide, I feel like a lot of teams, a lot of people out there are really feeling like they're at a crossroad. And for the last couple of years, they've had no shortage of challenges, with most of them have overcome, but they feel like they're at a crossroad to really try to figure out, okay, what is the right people strategy? how do I engage my team so that way we can take advantage of the marketplace, not continuing to use it as a reason why we're not growing, but adapt in order to grow. So today we're going to hit a bunch of different things that I think companies think, okay, in order to drive more performance, I have to hold my team accountable. And there's this friction with that way of thinking. So if we go to the next slide, what we want to offer today is exploring 5 must-haves to really balance accountability. How are you in your organization driving alignment? How are you securing commitment? How are you helping really nurture focus? Do you have enough transparency in order to solve this accountability challenge? And ultimately, how is your organization learning on a continual basis to get better and to not really lean back on an accountability, but really say, okay, you know what? We're using accountability to apply what we learn. So as we explore these, I think, Kirk, if we can go to the next slide, we want to really, we've seen what suffered through the pandemic is collaboration is still not back to pre-pandemic levels. And so I think that's a common challenge we're going to explore further. And we know that if you can get the collaboration, you'll drive alignment. Next slide. We also know, and both Kirk and I have seen, Kirk's all about numbers, and I think being transparent about numbers and just being transparent about expectations. And I think oftentimes, certainly in the first year of the pandemic, transparency disappeared and there was a lot of murkiness. And as people have gotten better and better at working in this environment, they've been able to create light and create transparency, but that hasn't been across the board. Let's go to the next slide. I think in addition, we've seen one-on-ones really suffer, and we've seen them suffer. And so I think companies are missing a huge opportunity that even though we still might be on a screen, are we taking advantage of that time to drive focus? And then if we go to the next slide, there's a practice we'll talk about, and are we looking back and are we learning from our wins and losses? I think it's really easy to focus on what we're getting wrong. And I think if we want teams to want to be accountable, we have to spend as much time celebrating the wins. And just, I think in general, companies, because of COVID fatigue and other reasons, just haven't been doing the best job. So these are some potential areas that as we explore this concept of avoiding accountability, we hope to give you some how-tos and really answer questions that you might have specific to your environment around the struggles with accountability. So Kirk, take us to our next slide and where you wanted to drive the conversation in the beginning.
Yeah, let's do a poll. Let's find out more about people in the group, so we can really drill into what people are thinking about, where they're at. Artie, will you launch the poll? Here we go. So the work environment, what is your current work environment? 4 choices, right? Multiple choice, full remote, hybrid, mostly remote still, or hybrid, mostly in person, or full in person. So jump in and let's kind of see who's there. We'll share the results. Right? So 44% are full remote, 17% mostly, and then 22 and 17 going the other way. Interesting shift. Interesting shift. Just to add to the complexity of the world, I mean, beyond supply chains and COVID and pandemic, I mean, we might be a country at war again, with Russia rolling tanks into Ukraine. So it just, what impact does that have, right? Just one more thing to throw into the mix there. So Alex, kind of as you and I were digging into this topic and really understand what's going on, we have our clients, but beyond that, what do we see that's going on? We did some research with the Gallup, and they found that 60% of the U.S. workforce is white collar. And then back in April of 2020, without preparation, 83% of them went remote, right? Basically get your stuff, get home and keep working. And then even 2 years into the pandemic, it's something like 70% of the people, white collar workers in the USA, are still working at home. And somehow 20% of blue collar workers figured out how to work from home. Maybe they keep the truck with them or something like that. And then a lot of employees, especially the ones in the big cities, they decided, they could live somewhere else and have a much better quality of life. So they moved outside of commuting range. So now what? You got to ask people to move back, if you want to get back into the office. So Alex, how do CEOs keep employees motivated, engaged, whether they're working remotely or not?
So great. So one of the things I think that's important, and we've got a hand raised. So Deborah Reynolds, I see your hand raised. If you've got a question, please drop it into chat. So I think what's really important is that companies have to look at first their communication cadence in terms of how is the C-suite, how is the C-suite engaging the workforce, and especially how is the C-suite engaging the workforce in a meaningful bi-directional conversation. So I've been surprised that some companies feel like doing an all hands once a quarter is enough. I think doing an all hands once a month is bordering on not enough. So I think there's a very important dynamic here that what we have to increase the frequency of the conversation that we're having. I also think that we have to be more inclusive. A lot of companies map out strategy, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit. A lot of companies map out strategy in a very small group. And I think one of the things that can help people just feel more connected is just having better visibility to those discussions. That's one level. So imagine bringing more relevant data about what's going behind closed doors to those all hands. How can you communicate things that maybe in the past you didn't share? And in some cases, how can you involve the next level of management on maybe some traditionally more sensitive topics that maybe they weren't involved in the past? So think about how an organization can communicate things that maybe they didn't because they thought they were sensitive, and how can the organization begin to involve people that might not have had a chance to participate in some of those more sensitive discussions. Kirk, what, from your perspective, what do you think CEOs can do to help people keep motivated, engaged, regardless of where they are?
It's really what you're talking about now, is becoming more intentional. Now that people, I can't walk around the office and engage people, find out where they're at, put teams together. So it is more intentionally involving. Right now people are mostly at home, somewhat in the dark. They can't exchange information like they used to, and so being intentional. Whatever your planning cycle is, 90-day sprints, the full year going into it, really having the employees drive their action plan and those objectives, right? Being clear about those. You really, Alex, you really, some of the things that you highlighted tap into another area of the fundamental change in employment, where employee expectations are changing. And we dove in research for this webinar. We dove into a report that MIT put out, that was really stimulated from the 24 million people who resigned last year, and still 40% of the folks that are left behind, they're thinking about leaving their jobs. Some are thinking about leaving the workforce, others are thinking about leaving and going to a gig economy, and others are thinking about just changing positions, right? So it's a pretty 40%, right? That's a if you need people to deliver, which we need people to deliver, it's a scary number. And then what's interesting from that study at MIT, you could have two of the same companies in the same industry, and the attrition rates were very different. Where one company has a mass exodus and the other company is doing pretty good, right? The team members are happy, they're thriving, they want to keep going. And according to the MIT study, they found that the reason that employees were leaving is not compensation, it's not money. Is they feel disrespected. They feel job insecurity. They could feel a heavy workload, the weight of the world on their shoulders, where from being reorganized, maybe two companies merge or acquisition, and you're eliminating part of the staff, heavy workload, right? And then even innovative companies that are moving fast, right? It could be exciting, but going back to heavy workload, right? And that personally, what's wrong with a heavy workload? That's let's carry some water, make things happen. But everybody, as a CEO, you might think one way, but then as a team member or employee, you might think a different way about the heavy workload. So many employees, the expectation have changed. They used to think they had to commute in and be in the same space to do the work. People know that's not true anymore. So many employees prefer to work remotely. Some prefer to work in the office because they can separate their roles and responsibilities. And without the burden of commuting, like where I live in the DC area, it could take an hour and a half just to go 25 miles down the street. So without that burden of commuting, people are changing where they're located. They have more time to be a parent. They can see their children before they go to school. They can see their children when they come back from school. They have time to pursue, time and energy to pursue other interests, and time with relationships, the people they care about, right? So many, some of the fundamental changes, many employees, they want flexible hours. They want to start at a certain time, finish on a certain time. They may want to condense the work week into 4 days instead of 5, right? And the fact is, employees their households have adjusted to this new way of living that's very different than it was just in March of 2020. So for the CEOs who are going back to the old ways, kind of that iron fist, like Margaret Thatcher, they're going to be most likely at a disadvantage when it comes to recruiting the best talent, the A players, and retaining that talent. Alex, what are your thoughts about employees wanting more input?
Well, so I think this goes to this concept of engaging and really understanding the type of input. So in some cases, sometimes frontline employees want input, so maybe their work situation improves. I think, the hardship of maybe an unintended switch to remote and multiple delays of return to office. I've got a good example. We've got a client that's, like many other companies, delayed return to office. And while they've given their employees a stipend to improve their home office, it's still not the same. So the return to office in this case, this organization has a disproportionate amount of people that want to come back. And so this company's done a good job of keeping them informed, trying to show them that they're trying to be smart. They're in Washington, D.C., so they have to follow, D.C. up until last week had inside mask mandates at work. So I think when faced with that, they made the collective decision to wait a little longer. I think the input from mid-level management is a little different, because to me, oftentimes organizations are missing out on tapping into their mid-level management. And they're missing out because they're used to very much command and control, as opposed to engaging and sharing, hey, we're thinking about, going down this path or this path. What do you think? Like, there's one level of soliciting input about mission critical topics. Now, they don't necessarily have to participate, but if you as a leader are making people feel like they're being heard, that's one level of input. In my previous answer about how can we get people to be motivated and engaged, I think it goes back to really completely shifting on where people participate. So depending on the type of planning that your organization does, I am going to talk a little bit about OKRs here in a little while, but you don't have to do OKRs in order to get people involved in planning. You don't have to, there's a variety of frameworks that you can use in order to give people an opportunity when important decisions are being considered. Bring people into the mix so they see how these decisions are made and they can actually bring some perspective at their level. My experience and what we've learned from doing OKRs for the last 5 years and over 60 companies is a lot of the greatest ideas are coming from the frontline management. And so I just don't think companies are doing the best job possible at engaging frontline managers and really saying, this is where we want to go. What do you think? So it's really shifting about pushing information and really thinking about how can we do a better job at pulling the information from that group. And I think the feel turns into a much different experience, a positive experience when you start to engage them in that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the factors involved, employees want more input, but then it comes to the question is, do they have the knowledge? Are they informed about, do they have real information about the company, about what's going on? Do they have the information they need where they would make a similar decision that the CEOs would make? And a lot of times, employees are in the dark. They guess at the financial standing of the business, the marketplace, sales, that they're really guessing. I remember one education, a for-profit education company that was quite large, was a nine-figure company. And education folks have a certain ideology about what's right. Profits are wrong and evil, and then this and that. And so they being uninformed, the employees not being developed, they literally wanted to do things that would cut the revenue, cut pricing to make the programs more affordable, and didn't really understand how that's going to impact the ability of the company to pay them, to compensate them. And so that employees want more input. So quite frankly, the employees have to operate on a higher level and have not just information, but a real understanding about how the business operates, so that when they're applying their judgment, it's really useful.
And I would go even further, Kirk. I think one of the things is that just because a company shares that information once, they think everybody is now up to speed.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges that companies face is being systematic about making sure that they bring people up to speed on the strategy. If they're doing a really good job, they might actually get some input. And really, before they even make decisions, if they can, make people understand that they have a voice, I think that's people are, a lot of companies are struggling because rather than being proactive and viewing the employee base as a source of important information to gather, they're part of the list of who to communicate to. And so to me, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I think just like helping people understand finances, I think helping people understand strategy takes a lot of conversations. And so, like I said, a few years back, and we've seen this pattern quite a bit, but it was the first significant one. It was a decent sized enterprise IT integrator here in the DC area. And they had some very ambitious growth goals, but were very frustrated that they were on a plateau. And I think one of the interesting things that we started seeing, and I know it was pre-pandemic, but when they started sharing, what the strategy was, what they learned and the opportunities that came out of it, it helped that those high performing entry level consultants that were really talented, and even in the mid-level, it helped them, one, participate with some ideas, but it also helped them say, okay, we really need to start doing a better job of succession planning and really developing our next level of leaders if we want to grow. So just by starting the strategic conversation and not just one and done, but doing it regularly, I think it helps spur additional things that need to happen if a company wants to grow. And so to me, we're trying to go back to this question are people avoiding accountability? I think people are just struggling, and accountability isn't always the answer. I think engaging is what we're trying to convey here. And so this is very much a new management reality, if you want to flip to our next slide, and really thinking about, how are we doing as managers in this decentralized environment? And 44% of the people attending today are remote. And some of you might have already been remote. We've interacted with a number of companies that were remote before the pandemic. Maybe all of you weren't, which is awesome. But I think what being remote has meant, it's put a lot of pressure on management understanding what's going on. When we were in the office, you could walk around, and even if you didn't have a structured environment, you could walk around, be able to have the water cooler conversation, and really be able to engage informally. The pandemic has made that a lot harder, but it still can be done. Managers need to understand they have to shift from, okay, I'll remember to do this because I'm in the office, to now I have to plan differently. And I actually have to set aside time in order to understand, how are my people doing? And for a lot of managers, I can appreciate that this is, very lonely. So Kirk, how does a manager and really help employees get more visibility into what's driving the business? Because I think, having a common point to bring people together, I think helps managers that are kind of struggling with this decentralization overcome this. So how can a company not force its managers, but enable its managers to better engage around numbers? Because I know you're the CFO, all about numbers. How can companies get better at that?
Yeah, numbers and clarity. And I want to build on what you're saying about making sure that employees are informed about their strategy and then the financial side. And that you're really, to highlight a point, I mean, that management is a hands-on sport, right? You're really getting in close and bringing people along so that they can really, take it, be informed and make the right decisions to drive outcome. So one thing that we find really, really useful is bringing that activities and outcomes to the employee's desktop as a dashboard. Where literally, like if there's a salesperson, they got to do 6 first appointments per week, they can see it. How many are scheduled versus how many do they need, and how many are done, and where's there a gap? So they know where to lean in. That proactively, Monday morning they can take on the challenge and get the outcome that's the 6 first appointments every week. So bring it to a login, that desktop dashboard, and at the employee level, they can see exactly what they should focus in on. That's completely aligned with your objectives, your strategy. It's critical. Otherwise, employers are just kind of winging it. And so they may not know what's going on, and they may be afraid to speak up. You saw that in MIT study, like job insecurity. If they don't know what's going on, man, how many times can I say I don't know what's going on? But they log in and it's there. And even better if it's color coded, red, green, yellow, right? The red I need to take action against, like now, proactively.
A lot of managers seem to be falling into some bad habits. So what we've seen over the last couple of years, and would love to get your perspective here, is we're seeing some managers are actually doing a decent job of goal setting, but they're not tracking. Some are tracking, but they're not having good discussions. And sometimes those not good discussions They're not running good team meetings. Sometimes they might be running decent meetings, but the one-on-ones aren't strong. I mean, collectively, hybrid meetings are just not where they need to be in terms of driving results. So when you think about a team, how can a manager be more intentional about keeping that team focused and accountable for fill in the blank, top line revenue, profit, the goal of the day? How can managers get better at that?
Yeah, that's a straight up growth CFO question. So I like that. So building on the dashboards, activities, outcomes, is that at a minimal, that monthly P&L financial statement, use it like a scoreboard. Better yet, if you make a visual out of it, from a top line revenue standpoint, what did we expect versus actually where are we at? And then you're teaching your sales team, look at the number story. Where do we expect to be? Where's there a gap? And then stop and think, well, why? Why am I better than expected? Why am I worse than expected? Not judgmentally, but am I doing the numbers I expected to achieve? And then proactively, you're teaching your managers, the sales managers in this case example, to take action, right? So if you're the CEO, you can literally feel the pressure coming off your shoulders, whether it's sales, delivery, the support functions, people know what needs to be done by the dashboard, combined with the financials like a scoreboard, and they can make those adjustments at a minimal every month, to get back on that flight plan. The key, something that really came, beyond working in the corporate world for the last 30 years, something that really became apparent to me when I started teaching grad school at Georgetown University, teaching financial management, even mid-career managers and executives and CEO business owners of private businesses, man, we do not know how to read the financials. A lot of us look at financials and our eyes roll over to the back of our head, or we get wrapped around the axle. Most CEOs of private companies really don't understand what the numbers are telling them, where there's opportunity. So it really is slowing down, and have financials that are useful. Don't have a 6-page P&L. I've seen I can't even make sense of it. Get it down to 1 page, where it's intuitive. I can see 80-20. What's jumping out? What's better? What's worse? Where can I take action? And then it starts getting red, green, yellow, right?
So let's build on that, because I think what you said is very prophetic that can be applied across every department, which is, I think the amount of things companies are looking at that drive success are overwhelming the majority of the team. And what you just described, I think, is the essence of what I think I see some companies doing a really good job. They're simplifying. So a lot said in the software world. We have a couple people in software about user-centered design. And so to me, it's cool if you have a fancy automated dashboard, but if your department has a simple way of defining success, I think, to me, that can be very powerful. There's a variety of ways to do that. And I think that's one of the most important questions that people should ask themselves when they leave, is for the team that you're on, whether it's the C-suite, a department team, it's, how complicated is the dashboard that you look at that drives success? And so to me, just the distillation of what you described, I just wanted to double down on that, because I think it's such a powerful insight that's easily overlooked. But when you challenge people, they struggle to narrow it down. So I think that's an important dynamic. So we had another poll question. We wanted to understand, as we go into solution mode, of how to better manage the accountability. We'd love to understand what's your biggest issue with accountability. So hopefully we captured what you're struggling with. If we didn't, hit other. And hopefully here in a few seconds, we're going to see some answers in terms of what were the final results, or what did we hear from our attendees that they're struggling with on accountability. Okay, interesting mix. It hasn't worked, afraid of conflict, worried employees will leave.
Well,
So
it's really that centerpiece, afraid and worried that I'm gonna have an adverse impact on my workforce. That's where the 80-20 is.
well, and I think we talked about this in the prep. There's people just being afraid of conflict, like, oh, I don't want to get into it, versus if I say something, they're going to go. Two separate things, similar emotional drivers, but ultimately they're separate. So let's go into, Kirk and I have a couple solutions that will hopefully potentially you can consider to start addressing accountability. So let's go to the next slide. As I mentioned at the beginning, my firm, we focus, one of the things that we specialize is helping companies adopt the OKR framework. And so this framework is meant to get an organization to set top level objectives and to do it. Initially some companies will start just doing it one quarter at a time. And so at the beginning of the quarter, for the first 2 weeks, you'll do strategic planning, you'll set the objectives, then for 10 weeks, you'll work on it. And then at the very end, you'll do a retrospective, you'll review, rinse, and repeat. And you do this not just for the top level, you do this all the way down to the lowest level of management or even the frontline employee. Companies vary in terms of how much they push this down. Now, what's really important is that this motion tends to start driving some very powerful things. In particular, the start of the cycle drives the collaboration, that aligning or cascading down that's meant to socialize and drive collaboration, because if you want to get people committed, you've got to get them talking first, then aligned, and that's how you get them committed. If we go to the next slide, I think this is potentially one of my biggest insights from the last 2 years of the pandemic, is that most managers and leaders have not mastered yet the new management cadence that they need to have in order to be successful. So OKRs as a structured framework encourages organizations that want to drive fast growth to be doing weekly one-on-ones and bi-weekly team meetings. Some people do weekly team meetings, and that's great. Now, imagine if you started those meetings by looking at your goals, or in this case, OKRs. The focus that you get is pretty powerful. And if you can actually see everyone else's OKRs on your team, that transparency is also very powerful, because it infuses this peer accountability that generally tends to have a positive motivation, because human beings are inherently a little competitive. And so when everyone can see the results, that tends to get you a little motivated. Now, the important thing is we're not suggesting stack ranking. What we're suggesting is people are sharing. And that sharing process is actually meant to get people to ask for help. And that transparency helps the people that are doing well help the people who need help, not pull out and win. Transparency is about helping everyone perform. And I think if we go to the final slide, I talked about the things to balance accountability. So OKRs as a goal-setting framework, I've seen no other framework deliver alignment and commitment with this level of consistency. It's set up when you're looking at your OKRs in team meetings and one-on-ones, you get the focus and transparency. And if you do retrospectives in a meaningful way, you're actually going to get a tremendous amount of learning. And one of the things that I think are really important from a retrospective is that the concept of accountability, and we haven't even done this yet, so I think it's important just to level set. All it is the factual reconciliation of what was expected versus what happened. And in a retrospective, If you can actually understand what got in the way and what you plan to do differently, it allows people and teams to perform at a higher level. So to me, accountability, if you treat it as that unemotional, factual reconciliation of what was expected versus what happened, and then try to pull out the learning from it and be intentional about what's happening next quarter, it creates this very positive momentum that all of a sudden people will embrace accountability because of the benefits that come with it, as opposed to avoiding it. But that takes a significant shift in an organization to get comfortable, to be able to talk openly about wins and losses, because a lot of times we want to talk about the wins, but we're uncomfortable talking about the losses, and we can't realize that. So hopefully that's been helpful. Kirk, let's shift to your perspective and what you might offer to help people slay the accountability dragon.
Yeah, and Alex, I love that model, because it's essentially what you're doing is a 90-day sprint. You plan, you do, you assess the outcomes, and use that intel to go back to another loop again, 90-day sprint again, to drive more outcomes. So it's a beautiful cadence, fantastic. So we can definitely build on that. How do we get the financial, using that growth CFO lens? I'm going to give you 3 methods that are proven to answer 2 of the questions that we asked when we sent out the invitation for this webinar. Those 2 questions were, what is the best way to keep the entire team focused and accountable to achieve that top line revenue and profit goals? And the second question is, how can finance get more visibility into what's driving our numbers, right? And so we're 3 tools, 3 methods that will work for you. And we've been touching on this, is that daily dashboard, right? When your team member, doesn't matter if they're in sales or delivery or that support function, they come in and imagine what it's like for them. They can see red, green, yellow, where they at. If develop a culture where people speak up, right? If I'm stuck, I'm stuck. I can't figure this out. I've been 2 days in a row. I can't figure out how to get the 6 appointments. And when you think about your dashboard, it'd be very easy to go to, like the best of breed technology solution, like Microsoft Business Intelligence is a great solution, but it's going to take months to figure out what you need, configure it, burn it in, and use it. Don't let perfection get in the way of good. If you start with 1 number on a spreadsheet, that's all you need. Do that, through shaping week to week, you'll figure out exactly what you need. Something that you thought you need to measure will go away. And then you can focus on what's the real number. And once you get to that point, then it makes sense to make the investment in something like Microsoft BI for a couple of reasons. You know what you need, and it's a straight path to implement it and then burn it in and fine tune it. So and a key thing here, highlighting developing your people. Doesn't matter if they're entry level or if they're experienced managers, develop them to look at their numbers. If the numbers are the only thing that you can measure, where are they at, over or under, and proactively use their judgment to make those course changes, literally now, real time. So it gives you clarity, and it comes down to really developing your people to do it. The second tool is habit 2, using your monthly financials like a scoreboard, right? And same thing, teach managers. Some companies definitely teach managers to take ownership for their profit and loss statement. Some companies go even a step further, where they do open books management, where even line employees have the same information that the managers have. And I don't know if you all remember the book by Jack Sack, The Great Game of Business. He talks about how to do that, almost gamify using the financials so that line employees can make really good decisions. When you do, we call it a habit, and Alex spoke about this. When you do something consistently, discipline, the first time people look at financials, expect that they're not going to understand. They're going to want to avoid it because it looks like hieroglyphics. But by the 3rd month, they're getting used to it. They know the format. They start developing some skills on where to start, bottom line up kind of stuff. And then by the 6 months, your team members, your managers, they're getting to the point where they won't make a decision without looking at their numbers. So they know where they stand, and they know what where they're moving the dial. And so increasing the weight's coming off your shoulders, right? Because they're taking the ownership. And by the end of the first year, you're soaring, right? You can plan, execute. They figure out 80-20, what takes us off course and what actions they can take to stay on course. So it's that transparency. They have the information and the skill that informs their judgment. So that fear is going away, right? That job insecurity. And again, there's a certain clarity. And you can definitely make dashboard style presentation, but you got to start with the raw financials. And if they're organized well, they start to become intuitive. You know, you get. I like to say I can go anywhere in the world, and with less than 5 minutes of preparation, I can have it too with any team anywhere. So maybe that's the military coming through. So then the third tool is you got to have, if you have the dashboard's got to be fully aligned with where you're going. In 5 years, do you want to double the size of your business? Do you want to triple the size of your business? Right. And so that's where we get into create a financial flight plan to your objective, and why is that outcome important to you? At that point, you're building profitability, your household income, you're building a valuable business. So by starting with the end in mind, you create your future org chart. For me to triple my business, what do we look like at that point? Because as you grow, your role changes, people start to specialize, maybe you organize around certain regions. The business, from scale, the function of the business fundamentally changes at each step. So then you've got the future org chart, you got the business model, you can run what if scenario. Well, what if I do A in sales and marketing? What if I do B in sales and marketing? Which one gets us to the best outcome? And what can we afford? And what do we put in place from that flight plan that can track week to week, month to month, to make sure if I'm off course, the sooner we see it, the faster we can get back on course. So that financial flight plan, right? In the world of inflation, this is a good place to work it out. Inflation, you got to think about your pricing. Maybe you have contracts that automatically have a CPI adjustment in it. Wages, right? If you got cash in the bank, every day it's becoming a little bit less, your purchasing power is going down every day. So how do you preserve purchasing power for cash that's in the bank, right? So if you got the flight plan, the endpoint, then you can work backwards. What needs to be on each person's dashboard today for them to do their best work? And that's connected to your monthly financials, and all in the context of that overall flight plan that you're driving things to. And to bring things home, when you do this, it's going to result in clarity, right? And accountability, because team members will be, that the fear factor starts going down when people have better information. The fear factor starts going down when the managers are helping team members get back on track, right? So it's that true team effect going on. Financially, you're going to have higher revenue, more profit, better cash flow when this is done well. And you're having a business that's less dependent on you, so that the 7 succession options become available and you have a more valuable business. So then you have the option of being paid twice when it's time to pass the torch with your business. And then we have our book coming out this June, the Growth CFO Void. So I'm going to encourage you to grab that when we release it, and we'll definitely email you about it and that kind of stuff. And Alex, with that, we mission accomplished. Do you want to tackle one of the questions here?
Absolutely. So we've got a few minutes. Obviously, we want to kind of call to light. If you want to reach out to Kirk or myself, our email's up here. Depending on, you'll also get a follow-up email as well. So you can just drop your question into chat. I know I wanted to thank our producer, Arthi. We can't run a successful webinar without a great producer. Arthi, I know you were looking for questions. Have we gotten any from the group?
There's one from an anonymous staffing company. She asked, what is your take on how to keep your team from burning out under pressure in times when we're in high demand?
So I think one of the keys is to be able to talk about openly the concept of burnout. And I think it's not a question of, hey, how much are you working? I think leaders have to lean in on this, and they actually have to really not ask open-ended questions, but I think you have to certainly ask specific feel questions, and you've got to be able to come back to it to compare the answer, because there are some people who might find themselves in a state of high work, but the things that I would encourage our listeners today to be on the lookout for is really, number one, are people working so much that now there's signs of anxiety and their sleep is suffering? Because the moment sleep starts suffering, it's the downward spiral. Like, I can't, without getting on a milk box and talking about how important wellness is, and I take sleep very seriously. I might obsess a little bit about it. I take full ownership, but I've seen what happens when you have high workload and not a lot of sleep. And the pandemic has completely challenged our employee workforce on this front. So I think we've got to lean in and really understand, is the level of work impacting how people are feeling on the anxiety front? And are we really still struggling? How are we doing on the sleep side?
Yeah. I'll jump in there, and I would say, if there's a surge, and I don't know how long it's going to last, like in the CPA industry, tax season, there's a surge, then everyone goes on vacation. So you kind of know you work on for a certain period of time, but it ends. Okay. In a condition where you don't know how long the surge will last, and it's very hard for you to build capacity, which is usually through people, either people or systems, then what I would encourage CEOs to at least consider is, do the 80-20 on your clients. What are your best clients? Accept work from your best clients, from your best segments, the ones that you're going to do work with for years, even beyond the crisis. And then, quite frankly, if you don't have the capacity to do a fantastic job on other work, reject it. Send it to a competitor, because it's not worth trying to get every top line revenue dollar you can get, that you compromise whatever your standard is on delivery for your clients, because it's just not a world that most of us don't want to live in. So I'd make an intentional cutoff point, and then I would do what I can to build capacity.
Right. And so we just got a couple more questions, Kirk. So Andre's asking, we're still struggling with work-life balance, especially in COVID-19, being an essential service company, stress, fatigue, low self-esteem due to lack of reward recognition. Thoughts? I mean, yes, there's a lot of people, we have a lot of current clients that are essential service companies. And I think, building on what Kirk said, you've got to pay really close attention to the things that you can potentially do. So, can the company do better on rewards? Can the company do better on recognition? And here's the thing. If a company evaluates the cost of losing an employee versus lower productivity and people taking time, the taking time is a much lower cost. And I think companies just aren't doing the math fast enough in order to be able to use those tactics. So Andre, I'm not sure in your particular case, but hopefully, how can you influence the higher ups to really pay close attention to, when possible, dialing back the work where possible and increasing reward and recognition? Easier said than done. Kirk, there's a next question that I think you should answer. It's from a Brad. What if you're a small company and don't share financial information with employees because the more they know, the more money they think they should be paid? You probably get that a lot.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming from the question that we already agreed that when you say employee, I'm thinking like staff employees, and I guess I got to ask for clarification. Are we sharing financials with the managers? And then there's a fear, if I'm not sharing financial information with managers, there's a real fear the first time I do that, what's going to happen, right? And it's almost a leap of faith to actually do it. And you want anybody you're giving financials to, you want to prepare them for it. You want to teach them how to look at it, because otherwise they don't know how to look at it. So I'd recognize it's a leap of faith. I prepare the team members, and I'd really think through the pros and the cons of working in isolation where managers and team members don't know what's going on versus working in an environment where they do know what's going on. And I've been in companies where CEOs are making $2.5 million of household income per year, and we were open books to a manager level, but not an employee level, and there was never a problem. But I do appreciate it's to think about it. It can be concerning. If there's something incongruent about the compensation structure, I would work on that. And even the previous question, I think instead of trying to solve everything top down, manager down, kind of what we're talking about here is empower the team members to do it. Create internal masterminds of employee groups of 6, and let them state what the issues are and challenges are. What's keeping us from doing good by doing well by being doing good, something like that. Mixing it up, and let them figure out how to do it. And if more compensation is in order, because I don't want everybody to do better, let the team members figure out how to do it, right? And you'd be amazed at what comes back on that. And so I can definitely talk to you offline. It's a leap of faith, but I haven't seen it blow up once yet. But there's always a first.
So Kirk, we're coming up at the top of the hour. I think it's time to wrap things up. It's been a good, fun hour of trying to address this question. Is your team avoiding accountability? And hopefully, based on the things that we talked today, it's not that they're avoiding accountability. There are these challenges that we discussed that, depending on where you are in the organization, as a leader, you've got to think about how you're stepping up and how you can address the gaps. Because the reason you might think people are avoiding accountability is maybe not the reason. So want to make sure that, don't jump to conclusions for, are they avoiding accountability? And really think about, ask yourself, based on what you heard today, are you as a leader doing everything you could or should be to engage employees so they don't have to avoid accountability? So that's it from me. Kirk, final words before we sign off.
Alex, that is so well said. Just empower people with what they need, financial and non-financial information, develop them, and the people really step up, and those are the ones that you want to keep the long term. So I would say for either Alex or I, if you want to do an individual conversation, just email either one of us, and talk about the specifics of your accountability thoughts and challenges, and I'm pretty sure you'll get something good out of it.
Okay, great, wonderful. Well, Kirk, it was fun doing it. I look forward to the next time. I hope everyone has a great day. I'm signing off.
Yep, and see y'all soon. Be well.